My name is Joshua Ross, and on behalf of the University of Denver and Entrepreneurship at DU, welcome. I want to thank Denver Startup Week for being an awesome partner and partnering with us on this event. Welcome to the brand new Community Commons. I'm really excited about our evening tonight. We have an amazing panel and a moderator discussing a very important and critical topic. I know students at the University of Denver are passionate about this topic. And the reason I know is why. When I ask students why they choose the University of Denver, of course they say education first. I'm supposed to laugh there. But I also know it's because of the access to the outdoors, the hiking, the biking, the skiing, the touring, the climbing, the fishing, the rafting. It's an important factor in their decision process. One student at the University of Denver has taken his passion and turned it into a successful business. I'd like to introduce Ben Berger, a senior marketing student and the founder of Ben Cycles, unique vintage bikes in the world of colorless abundance. His words, not mine. Please welcome Ben.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ben Berger, and I am the founder of Ben Cycles. It's a startup bike shop, and we're going to be talking a little bit about sustainability and the bike business. Let's jump right in. So first, I wanted to start off with a little bit of background about Ben Cycles. It all started really thanks to COVID. Businesses were shutting down. My friends and I really had nowhere to go. And the only thing we could do really is ride our bikes around. And that's what we did. And it was awesome. An empty city with no cars, that's a lot of fun to ride around in. But around this time of year, Colorado usually gets this thing called snow. And that snow usually sticks to the ground and it makes it awfully hard to ride your bike around. So we were forced into my parents' garage. This is where we started tinkering. We started taking bikes apart with the limited tools we had. We were learning a lot. It was a lot of fun. And it got out of control pretty quickly, as you can see from all the stuff we have in the garage. We had bikes, tools, all kinds of stuff. Got to the point where we had too many bikes and we had to thin the herd out a little bit. So we decided to list 4 of our bikes on Craigslist, and 1 week we sold 3. So I thought, wow, there's a market for this. People are buying bikes. If I can sit in the garage all day, build bikes with my friends and make money at it, sign me up. Where do I sign the dotted line? That's awesome. So what we do is we refurbish vintage bikes and parts, and we bring those back to the market, and we make vintage bikes more fun and more accessible. So this is the first bike we bought, photo on the left. It's a 1965 Corda. I didn't know too much about it, other than that was from 65, era of Jimi Hendrix. I had to have it. The other thing we knew about the bike is it was heavy, it was slow, and it wasn't much fun to ride around. So, and keep in mind, this is about 2 years ago. So this is at the very beginning of all this, before we had tools and knowledge to really work on bikes. We also knew this was a big project, so it sat on the back burner for about 1.5 years. In that 1.5 years, bikes came and went. We started to collect parts. We got smarter. We knew how to work on bikes. And eventually I was in the garage with my friend, Zach, and I was looking at the bike and I thought, wow, that thing needs to be on the road. I told him, let's build this thing up. So we started Frankensteining. We took parts from different bins, different buckets, and we started throwing stuff on, see what would fit, what wouldn't. And eventually we came to the bike on the right. That was our creation. And you might be thinking, okay, you threw some random parts on a random bike. How much more capable does that make it? How much more fun does that make that bike? Well, I'll show you. You're able to take it off sweet jumps now, as Napoleon Dynamite would say, thanks to the fatter tires we were able to fit. And then on the right there, that's a photo. I went bike packing for the first time last summer with my friend Zach. And we rode from our doorstep in Denver through stage 1 of the Colorado Trail, camped the night, and then rode back. And after that, that's when it really hit me that, wow, this bike, no matter what you throw at it, it can handle it. Whether it's jumps, dirt, snow, it doesn't matter, it can handle it. So that's great. We built a fun bike, but how in the world is that sustainable? Well, essentially what we did is we turned a bike that couldn't do anything into a bike that could do everything. We turned the undesirable into the desirable. And we did this all with recycled parts that we had laying around. And the issue really isn't with the the bike itself, it's the components on it. So after swapping all that out, it hangs with all new bikes now, which is pretty fun. I just like to demonstrate through pictures. The bike on the left cannot do what the bike on the right is doing. There's just no chance. It's not fun. And like I said before, the frames aren't the problem. These old bikes, they're either bound for the scrapyard or they'll be donated and then scrapped. And that's just not right. So we're trying to keep those bikes out of the scrapyard, repurpose them and make them fun to ride. Not every time though we get a bike in, parts are usable. Sometimes things are rusty, sometimes parts get seized. You can't use everything. And you can't really throw bike parts away. Like that just feels weird. Just feels sacrilegious in a way, just not right. So what we have in the garage is we have an art bin, and we fill that art bin full of parts. And eventually, once that bucket starts to overflow, my buddy, he's a great TIG welder. He'll come over and we'll lay everything on the ground. We'll make some cool art out of it. He'll TIG weld it all. And then he'll eventually weld a metal rod to the end of it, and we'll stick it in his garden. I don't know how his parents feel about it, but art's subjective. I think it's great. Here are a couple other things we've made out of parts that we couldn't use. We used a brake lever as a hat hook. You can also screw that into the wall and use it as a coat hanger, which is awfully fun. And we also play chain Jenga in the shop. These are stretched or rusted chains that you coil up kind of like a coil pot. And you play Jenga. You see how high you can stack the chains. It's a great way to pass time. It's a lot of fun. So yeah, really the main thing we want to do is we want to keep all of this out of the landfill somehow. Like you shouldn't be throwing away any of this stuff. It can be repurposed or reused somehow, some way, especially with these old bikes. They have so much charisma. They're cooler than all the new stuff. And with a couple extra parts you throw on, you can keep up with all the new stuff. So this is my shop manager. Her name is Quigley, and she helps us stay organized and everything. But yeah, so thank you all. This is awesome, and ride safe.
I think Ben's hiring as well, correct? I don't think he'll hire me, even though when I grow up, I want to be Ben. So thank you. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is also a panelist. Robin Thurston is the CEO of Outside, the world's leading creator of active lifestyle content and experience. Please give a big hand for Robin Thurston.
Ben, I'll let you know that I learned how to build a bike actually just down the street. There was a shop, I'm not actually sure if it's still there, called the Denver Spoke, that I actually raced for and worked at when I was, I don't know, probably underage, probably 11 or 12 years old. And they let me build bikes in the back. There's a lot of funny stories about that, but so not too far down the street. So I know the area well. I grew up here in Denver. I have been part of the sort of active lifestyle category space for really, I'd say, my whole life. I started skiing. How many people are from Colorado? So if you went to high school here, there used to be a program that took you up skiing every other Friday for $7. You got to ski, you got lunch, and bus up to one of the resorts. So we were skiing very, very young and got into cycling because essentially we had a warm winter and they said, oh, you should race your bike. There also used to be something called the Red Zinger Mini Classic. People might know what the Coors Classic is, but it was essentially something for juniors to start bike racing. And so I've been in the category a long time. Before Outside, I started a company called Map My Fitness on the App Store. We had 2 of the first 100 first iPhone apps in the store. And I think today they still have about 65 million users globally on that platform. So I love this category. I spend all of my time in it. And I'm fortunate enough to have founded 2 companies in the space that have allowed me to sort of marry business, entrepreneurship, my love of the outdoors into a category. So Outside, I would say we stole the brand. Not really. We bought Outside Magazine and Outside Television, and so we took over the brand because essentially it is the most recognized brand in the entire outdoor category, and have big ambitions of kind of where we're headed. But I'll give a little overview. We have this vision of being essentially the world's home for the active lifestyle participant, no matter what age. no matter what diversity, no matter what category you're in, we want to be the place where you visit, not only to get inspiration, but ultimately to activate yourself into that, whether that's, making sure that you're going to the right ski location from a travel perspective, or that you are engaged with the right bicycle that might fit your needs, or that you learn how to do things from if you're climbing or skiing or other things. And so we're just really getting started. I mean, we touch about 80 million unique people a month, and we view this sort of daily destination as like a way to integrate not only content, because a lot of people right now, we've got 45 brands in the category. They think of us as just a content or a media company that was a roll up. We really are building an entirely new architecture for the journey of this active lifestyle participant, and how they not only engage with the experiences they're going to do, but ultimately the utilities. Like, we own some tools one called Trail Forks, one called Gaia GPS, that essentially help you in the backcountry if you don't have access to cell service, and you can use all the maps. And, the community is a big part of this. And so I'm going to talk a lot about how that fits together. But ultimately, when people get inspired to do these activities, they need a lot of gear. So it could be used gear, it could be new gear, but they need a lot of gear. So commerce is a big part of this as well. But ultimately, we want to be viewed as essentially this like guide. How do we guide you through this journey that most people are doing 3 activities in a year? They might be doing 12 to 15 activities over the course of a lifetime. And so how are you in a position at the right moment to help somebody through that journey? Again, no matter where they live, no matter how they're going to, sort of engage in that activity over time. So as I mentioned, we touch about 80 million people a month, and about 250 million people a year across all of the brands. We, again, have a variety of brands in all of these categories, but they're all interconnected essentially with one single sign-on. You can essentially use that, login that you create, no matter which property you're on, in our ecosystem. We almost have everything hooked up. We only recently bought Pink Bike and Trail Forks, so they're just coming online now. But essentially, everything's linked through that single sign-on, your outside login. A lot of people ask me, are we a media company? And certainly our authenticity and sort of creativity is born in content. That is, we have about 250 people on staff that write content, and we network with about 10,000 freelancers that write content for us regularly. But I don't actually view us as a media company. I really view us as a technology company, because if you're going to change the journey or help someone through or guide them to basically being more active, like, we want people to engage in these activities a lot more than they do now. And in order to do that, you have to build a new customer journey. So we're sort of in the process right now of rebuilding the personalization, how you engage with these platforms, how you consume content, how you interact with them. And it really takes all of this data to be able to do that. Like, we not only need to know that you registered for an event or in our event registration platform, but we need to know that it's 10 weeks away if we're going to guide you through the journey of getting ready for that event. And then how do we how do we help you celebrate it afterwards? Not just getting your photo package, but how do we make sure that you've had a great experience so that you sign up to do a new one? There's a crazy stat actually in the US, not true during COVID, but was true before COVID, about bicycles. 50% of all new bicycles essentially only get used once. And the reason for that is that most people, when they buy a new bicycle, they have one bad experience, car gets too close, they get a flat tire, they don't know how to change it, and ultimately give up on cycling. And so that's the type of thing that we want to help people through that journey, so they don't just give up after the first try when they buy a bicycle, as an example. And we're doing this through a membership layer called Outside Plus that essentially gives you access to the entire ecosystem of benefits through the membership layer that we have created to sort of bring all of these pieces together across all of these different verticals. We own a lot of brands. You might recognize some of them, but again, we've heavy focus on the media brands that we've bought over the last 24 months and started to pull together. A lot on the experience side, everything from NASTAR, that is the timing system that sits at the ski resorts, to travel company that essentially will help you guide where you want to go. And then these utilities that essentially allow us to understand whether or not somebody actually went to do the activity. Like, I'm super interested in if you're psyched to go see Warren Miller, the film, and that you watched it, but I'm actually more interested in, did that motivate you to go skiing, right? So we're really trying to bring all this together. And you talked about it. We also own a marketplace and Pink Bike that sells about $300 million of used bicycles a year on the platform. And we're going to be expanding that into everything from kayaks to ski gear to camping gear as part of the platform. So it's all interlinked together through essentially understanding you as a customer better than any one of these products or services had done in the past. So we have about 1.8 million subscribers on the platform, about 20 million social followers, as I mentioned, 250 million people a year. Really, all to say that it is a big audience, but there's a lot of change that we hope to create in this audience over time as we think about engaging new people in these categories. And so we talked about internally this idea of active for all. It shouldn't be for specific groups of people, maybe because they have access or they grew up in a certain place, but how do you essentially allow everyone access to not only the outdoors, but physical activity in general is a really big part of how we've talked about the company. And so I'm just going to point out a few stats. I'm not going to read all this to you, but essentially, if we want to not only get bigger as an outdoor industry, it has to be more inclusive. We have to bring more people into these categories. And then ultimately, they also have to understand how to sort of operate. We were just talking before about like backcountry skiing. There's a lot of new people up backcountry skiing, not necessarily diverse yet, but we also, when they get out there, we need to know that they're going to do it in a responsible way. And so that's also a big part. I'll talk about sustainability in a minute. But there is, in the Black communities and Hispanic communities, a lot of people, a good example is we've done a lot on our imagery in the publications, full audits of, are we diverse enough? Are we showing it to an audience and really allowing them to embrace these activities? Well, that's important. Don't get me wrong. We want to do that, and we'll continue doing that as part of our program. But I would actually say something like doing translation into Spanish will have a bigger impact on bringing new communities into our system than just changing imagery. Because one thing I often note is that, yes, people can read the internet from anywhere. So you want to make sure that those people that are coming to the websites, but if you think about something like our print publications, you have to remember where today they're sold in terms of the zip codes. So, just because you walk into a Safeway and you see as an example, Ski Magazine this month was the first time ever in the 80-year history of Ski Magazine that there was a Black skier on the cover shot by a Black photographer. But again, we have to remember as an organization that just because we put that on the cover, it doesn't necessarily mean the Black community seeing that and then inspired to want to go skiing, because you have to put it in the right places. So we're thinking a lot about our, essentially our goals around how to bring a more diverse community together. But ultimately, we have to be very, very specific about the activation and the things that we invest resources in to actually create change. Change has historically been very hard in these categories from a demographics perspective. So, how do we think about this? How do we talk about this internally? We really want to, not only include, a much more diverse audience and perspectives and the voices that we have in all of the channels where we create content, but it is about our team. It's like, how do we engage? How do we hire people so that they can come in and help us change the thinking of how to attract more diverse audiences in these categories? Certainly the brands and products matter. And like I said, things like imagery and positioning and how we allow access. Like a good thing we're doing, we're working on right now with the membership is going to organizations that we know have brought diverse communities into these categories and offering free membership to their bases because they are showing that they're making big changes on a go-forward basis. So, as I said, diversifying our workforce is a big deal, educating the staff on issues and really, not making a commitment to do that on a day-to-day basis as we do our trainings and how we think about, the overall workforce that we have. As I said, ensure the brands promote a diverse voice and regularly engage on these commitments, these communities, the partners, and, certainly the organizations that we're involved with. Just a quick thing here to say that we have done, a huge audit over the last 2 years and really, certainly came to the conclusion as we were acquiring these assets that they had frankly done a terrible job of imagery that was diverse to attract a diverse audience into these categories. And we're trying to rectify that. It does take time. It does take time to re-educate your staff to, spend the additional time to be able to do that. But we're committed to it because we think that the only growth for this industry is going to come through these channels. Also thinking about language, as I mentioned, things like Spanish and Chinese translation, even for the US, not internationally. Audio visual access is a huge deal. Like, I love audio. We have 27 podcasts today. We're doubling the number of podcasts simply because you can go skiing and still listen to a podcast, or you can go do an activity like a hike and listen to a podcast and be inspired at the same time. So we're big on audio visual, and then certainly things like scholarships that we're really thinking about. How do we extend to events and organizations that are helping us push this forward? So quickly, I know today we're going to talk a lot about climate change, and this is our other, I'd say, sort of pillar value and thing that we feel like we're committed to as an organization, because we have such a big problem. You'll see, recent articles we've written about, the fires in California and the destruction that they had on the trail system as an example. So, people can't just go back and go to their favorite mountain biking spot because basically it's wiped out in places in California, and certainly has happened in Colorado. We didn't have as big a fire season. I'll caveat that. It wasn't as bad as it was last year, but every single year that goes by, all of these areas are more threatened as we kind of move forward. So there are some big things that we're doing. We are committed to being essentially what we would call climate positive by 2030. We've worked hard on, and I'll talk about poly bags in a minute and some of the impact of plastics. But we've really already changed our carbon footprint by, partnering with a company, here locally. We plan on working on our headquarters, and we've launched this Plastic Alliance Impact Foundation that we've been working on to really help the industry understand the impact. I'm going to show you some visuals. To Ben's point, visuals are always good. So what does it mean? We want to go a step further. We want to save more on greenhouse emissions that we are generating as an organization. And then we want to help other businesses through the education we're doing. We own a publication called Business Outside Business Journal. We're doing a lot in there to educate people on what's happening around the ecosystem and how they as well can offset, whether it's a standalone running store or it's a big brand and corporation that is running in the outdoor industry. Just a little bit on carbon neutralization. Some of Outside Magazine's 100% are carbon neutral today. As I mentioned, areas like Backpacker. We think that there's just a big opportunity here to, reverse this and to think about it in a different way. It doesn't mean we're going to get rid of print, but we want to offset print specifically. So you can kind of see what the, sort of contributors here are towards, carbon neutralization. So we launched this thing called the Polybag Project a few years ago. One was sort of raise awareness. It started because we were at a conference, our editors were at a conference, and there were literally thousands of plastic water bottles everywhere from outdoor retailer. And we were like, this just doesn't make sense. Like, if we can't start here, how do we make a big change? So one of our lead editors, Kristen, started this program and has really, pulled together the industry around, thinking about how to get the plastic out of the system from an outdoor industry perspective. On average, each store produces a huge amount. So I'll just jump to the photo. This is what a back room looks like, whether it's a shoe store, an outdoor retailer, a bicycle store. This is what the back room looks like. And we wanted to try to do something specifically that would activate brands and individual retailers around this initiative. So when we launched this, we identified actually recently 10 small businesses, medium independent retailers in the Boulder area. We're testing this out right now, people like Backcountry, Patagonia in the area, and we're providing the shops with TerraCycle zero waste bins so that they can basically put all of this in a place as we work towards getting rid of it. New procedures for, essentially packaging these programs. But we're running the program right now. We're collecting data, but our hope is to roll this out nationally next year. Across the outdoor industry, if we can show the clear success of putting a program like this in place. So just a couple things on getting to zero waste before the panel gets going here. Educate employees on proper use, recycling, is a big deal. We're trying really hard, even in our new offices that we've moved into, and really everything from signage. We want to take advantage of audits and resources provided by the city. All retailers and brands should be doing this because there are actually a lot of resources. Things like installing water bottles, which I've seen here. So clearly this new building, they thought a lot about this. So there's just a lot of ways in our mind that you have to activate on a daily basis to basically think about this from a company perspective. So with that, I'm not going to do the video because I think I'm out of time. Do I have the time for the video? Anyone? 2 minutes. All right.
The outside can feel like an echo chamber. Expansive. Empty. Deafening. But in every falling rock, in every breaking wave, in every gust of wind,
This is insane.
there's a story. We're talking about risk-taking,
I want to say yes to things that scare me.
worldview changing.
I'm going to go out on this quest and understand what's really happening in our oceans.
No human on the face of this planet has ever done this before story.
I know that my very best level of slalom skiing is the best in the world, but it takes a lot to do that.
We are outside. We create premium adventure sports and lifestyle content for the digitally connected outdoor community.
Doing it on your own is incredible, but the best adventures are the ones that you can share.
We've got about 2 hours daylight left, and we've got a storm rolling in. Our chances are still 50-50.
There's a beckoning in every single one of us to see it with our own eyes.
My father was shot down in the Vietnam War. I've been planning an expedition to search for the place where his plane went down.
To be agents for change.
Right now, I feel like you really do need to be pushing positive stories of people of color doing these awesome things.
To break barriers.
Fear is not knowing what's going to happen next. Just felt like I was dying.
Billy's just an animal.
To risk for reward.
There's no shortcuts. There's no easy options.
Come on!
They're in for a shock.
We are creators.
Check that out. Right out of the garden, too. I mean, we're standing next to where we got this food from.
In the outdoors, you're at the mercy of Mother Nature.
We are connected.
Having the vehicle of music, it's a great gift.
We are community.
It was heavy.
We are everywhere.
It was about the message, and that's like that you can do anything.
An escape into the freedom of the outside.
You see, the thing is this, if you don't have a room in your life for the playful, life's not worth living. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy.
These are the stories that we live, breathe, and tell.
That was epic!
Hey, thank you, Robin. I was pretty excited when I first got on the phone with Robin on a Zoom call about a month or two ago, and I told him I've been a subscriber to Outside for over 25 years, and it's the only magazine still to date that I read cover to cover when I get it, because it's just such an awesome magazine. It's nice to see what a nice steward they have taken over and what the strategy is. So, all right, let's get on to our panel. Tonight, moderating our panel is Scott McLagan. Scott is a professor of the practice and management in the Daniels College of Business for over 15 years. Prior to coming to Daniels, he had 25 years career in the corporate world and was a senior executive with Emerson Electric. Scott, very qualified to moderate for one reason and one reason only. He's a fourth generation Coloradan and an avid outdoors person. Let's give Scott a big round of applause. Thank you, Josh.
Good evening. Really excited about this panel tonight. Just to give you a little bit of background, a few years ago, we had a student in our executive MBA program named Luis Benitez, and he's climbed Mount Everest 7 times and one of these crazy outdoors people. And he was recruited by Governor Hickenlooper to start an office on outdoor recreation inside of the state government of Colorado. And really, really brought into focus the outdoor industry in Colorado. He was able, through that, to be able to, number one, he was able to recruit the outdoor retailer show, convention, and forum to Colorado from Salt Lake, which was a big coup. He also was able to get the headquarters for VF moved to Colorado, which was another big one, and ended up going to work for VF. I don't know exactly how that all worked. But Luis has been a leader across the country in the whole outdoor industry and been involved in lots of different states that have gotten involved. Just to give you a sense, the outdoor industry globally is about almost a $900 billion industry. It is very global. So it's a very interesting space, and it's about 12 billion in Colorado. And Colorado is rapidly, I think, partially because of Luis and partially because of some of the things that are going on here, becoming the epicenter for the outdoor industry in Colorado. So DU has been very active in the outdoor experiential area for many, many years. We have been taking students for 20 plus years on outdoor experientials in the areas of building teams and leadership, et cetera. And so we've been able to be very active in the outdoor industry. Now, I don't know how many of you heard this today, so I'm going to actually have to read this, but this was purely by coincidence, by the way, that the chancellor announced today that DU has acquired 724 acres of pine-dotted land in Colorado's Larimer County, bordering Roosevelt National Forest. This wilderness mountain setting will make the James C. Kennedy Mountain Campus and distinguish DU as the only U.S. university that integrates urban and mountain experiences for all of its students. So that's a really big deal. I think Brandon Busby's here today, architect of all of that. So thanks, Brandon. I think there's many, many exciting things that are going to come about as a result of that. The other thing that is going on in DU is we've been working on an interdisciplinary certificate in outdoor leadership. And what I mean by interdisciplinary is the law school and the School for Public Policy and the business school are working together to look at and say, what are the really critical issues in the outdoor industry that the leaders that are going to be involved in this industry long-term need to understand and know. And we're going to develop a curriculum around that. Long-term, our vision is to have an undergraduate set of courses, graduate set of courses, and executive education level courses around outdoor leadership. So I think that's going to be very exciting. So interesting story that brings us into today and the picture we have above. I've been teaching sustainability and corporate social responsibility for almost 15 years now. And it's an area that I'm very, very passionate about. And a few years ago, we had an opportunity to build a class where we took graduate students to go do projects for the National Park Service. If you have been following at all, the National Park Service is under a tremendous amount of pressure right now. Just to give you an idea, last year, visitations into our national parks were up almost 50%, and their budget was down 8%. So think about that for a minute, trying to manage that. And when I was talking to the superintendent of the Rocky Mountain National Park about this, we were doing some projects for her. And she said, you know, our problem is we sit at the intersection of access and conservation. And this light went on in my head and say that again. We sit at the intersection of access and conservation. And you think about that a little bit. What does that mean? We're, you know, when Robin was talking, we're talking about access and how we all know how the outdoor makes us feel and how the outdoors is where we like to be, especially in Colorado. So access is a big deal, but we don't want to be the goose that laid the golden egg. And so we have to think about the environment and conservation and how are we going to balance these. Then obviously when COVID came around and there's been a lot of discussions in the whole DEI world that Robin also touched on, which is how do we expand access? and have social equity in this area. And as I was sitting there thinking about it, I just realized what a perfect example this is of the sustainability model that I've been teaching for 15 years. And it really is this idea that we have to try to balance or deal with. Number one, we want, whether it's a nonprofit or whether it's a for-profit social entrepreneurship, we want to be able to have economic prosperity. And economic prosperity in this industry means growing access, growing more people out there. At the same time, we've got the obvious environmental issues associated with more and more people in the outdoors, and then you overlay climate change on top of that. So that's an issue. And then we have social equity. How can we have these situations where more often than not, if you're trying to limit access, what do? You raise the price. And when you raise the price, you limit access, and you get back to the issues of social equity. So the ideas that we're going to talk about tonight really are, how do we deal with this? A few years ago, I had the opportunity, we had John Mackey, the CEO of Whole Foods, on campus. And he said something that has stuck with me, and I'd love to talk about this a little bit tonight. He said, I have eliminated the word trade-offs from my language, because the idea of trade-offs says I am going to take from one thing and give to the other. And he said, I am always trying to ask myself, how do we have, in this case, access and conservation and equity? How can we do that? What are the innovative solutions that we have out there? And that's the essence of our panel tonight. One other aspect of this model, and I'll just leave this up, is that there's very different perspectives, whether you're coming at this from a business perspective. Business will have one point of view about this. You'll have another point of view if you are the government and you are dealing with some of the more governmental issues. And civil society and our communities and our nonprofit organizations have yet another perspective on this. So the panel we have tonight is absolutely fantastic, and it represents people who are experts in all these different domains. So if I could ask the panel to come up, I will introduce them individually. So in the end, we have Karen Stanford. Karen's a Canadian, and she is the Chief Legal and Social Responsibility Officer for the Altera Mountain Company. And if you're not familiar with Altera, Altera is the owner of 15 iconic year-round mountain destinations, has the world's largest heliski operation. Big names in Colorado would be Winter Park and Steamboat, but the Icon Pass, which is part of Altera, also has Copper and Arapahoe and a number of other ski areas. So Karen joined Altera when it was formed in 2017. Prior to that, she was with IntraWest in Vancouver. She's now located in Denver and is in the corporate offices here. She also sits as a director of Altera Mountains Community Foundation and the National Sports Center for the Disabled in Denver. And so Karen brings a tremendous, obvious perspective on how a large, obviously, ski company, outdoor company is managing things. We also have my friend Michael Lowe right here. Michael is a family man, and he calls himself an accidental entrepreneur, which I don't buy, by the way. That's much better. Michael's founded 10 businesses. And served as the executive for half of them, including the Glenwood Adventure Club, which is now the second largest summer activity provider on the Western Slope. He's also played a very important role in building the entrepreneurial ecosystem in the Western Slope of Colorado. He's the CEO of CoVenture, a business incubator in Carbondale that focuses on economic resiliency for rural communities. Over the last 4 years, they've helped launch or scale 30 businesses who have collectively raised $18 million and resulted in 120 new jobs on the Western Slope. He's also a former Knowles instructor, which is the National Outdoor Leadership School, and tries to spend as much time in the outdoors as he can. And he was an executive MBA alum from 2016. So we're really glad to have Michael here representing that group. We also have another friend of mine, Michelle Zimmerman. Michelle, she says it kind of in her day job. She's the director of development for Sunshine Solar. She's been in the solar industry for something like 14 years, 15 years. But she not only has a passion for renewable energy, but also conservation and responsible recreation. She was the executive director of 2 nonprofit organizations focused on land and wildlife conservation before getting into solar. Her work in conservation and recreation led to the governor's appointment to the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission, where she served for 8 years and became the combined agency's first female chair in 2019. She also continues to race mountain bikes. She's on the Yeti Betty mountain bike team. She also got her executive MBA at the University of Denver. I think you've met Robin, probably don't need a whole lot more of introduction of Robin. And our last guest is Lloyd Athern. Lloyd is a lifelong climber. He's climbed mountains all over the world and is executive director of the Colorado 14ers Initiative. He's in his 13th year of leadership, and he's raised record levels of money, overseen a surge in the 14er trail stewardship work, and inventory trail conditions and hiking levels on all the 14ers. This is kind of interesting. He purchased the summit of one 14er and has his eyes set on acquiring mining claims on other 14ers so they can be brought into public ownership. Kind of a neat idea we might want to hear more about. Lloyd's mountain conservation work has recognized the National Park Service, the American Alpine Club, and the Jane Silverstein Rees Foundation. He has summited Colorado 14ers 90 times. And even though most of the field, although most of this field of CFSI works is not to do that, he has obviously done a lot of climbing in Colorado. So what a great panel. Represents a lot of different perspectives. And what we want to get out of tonight is just get a sense, a perspective of where we think the outdoor industry is today in terms of the kinds of intersections of the tensions that we talked about, and then maybe a little bit more of looking to the future. And since it's Startup Week, also look at what are potential opportunities for entrepreneurs in the outdoor industry. So I'm going to start with the first question and ask each of the panel members to provide a little bit of perspective on the outdoor industry, how it's currently managing the issues of conservation, access, and equity. And maybe we can start with Karen. We'll start there and we'll mix it up.
Sure, thanks. There we go, now it's on. Yeah, so obviously I'm here representing the for-profit aspect of that question. And for us, sustainability, the access, the equity, it's about a couple of things. It's about doing the right thing and being good corporate citizens, but more importantly for the business side of things, it's about making sure that we're sustainable forever. I really like that slide that you have up there, Scott, because oftentimes people think sustainability is just, the green component and climate change, which is obviously huge, but the social equities and the access is just as important for us for sustainability. I mean, skier visits and snow sports have been pretty much flat for decades in the United States. And you've got a couple of big ski companies and a lot of smaller ones, but right now we're really all jockeying for a piece of the same pie. And how do we get bigger market share of that tiny little pie that we have for skier visits in the United States and Canada? And what we really need to do is create a bigger pie. And we haven't cracked the code on that yet. And quite frankly, the ski industry is really behind in where we need to be in terms of diversity and access for all in the mountains. I wouldn't say it's for lack of trying, and we are trying to be as welcoming as possible and inclusive as possible, but we're simply not there yet. And we're looking at all the ways that we can be. On the sustainability in the environmental sense, we're a little bit farther ahead, climate change and how that affects the ski industry in particular. And climate change is the biggest threat to our business right now that we can think of, and how that's going to impact, the length of our winters and what the ski season looks like a decade from now is a scary thought. But marrying the two is what my role is largely about right now as the legal and social responsibility officer, is how do we tackle those two biggest threats and biggest issues in our industry, making it more diverse, growing a bigger ski industry and ski group and pie for us all to share in. And then how do we make sure that season and that winter, stays the way that we want it to be. For us right now, we're really looking at, we're all passionate about the mountains. Everybody in here is passionate about the outdoors, I assume. But I think you grow that from a relatively young age, and you grow your interest, and skiing is expensive, and you're not going to throw all your disposable income into something that you don't really and truly love. So right now we're looking at how do we target, youth and young people and college age people and groups, and giving them the passion for the mountains at a time when they're most likely to be attached to it, and making it accessible for them at that point. We've got a lot of other great ideas, but really it's about, growing the passion where we can, and then making sure that we're protecting those mountains for those later generations to show up. So we're looking at it from all angles. It's hugely important to our business, and it's critical. So, from an entrepreneurial perspective, if you can come up with ideas and offer products that make the sport more accessible to people, whether it's gear, whether it's instruction, whether it's transportation, but how do you get people to the mountains and enjoy the mountains in a more economical way? And then, on the green emissions, climate change side of the coin, what can you come up with that we're looking for kind of all options and solutions to do that are going to make, less waste, things more efficient, and better for the environment? Because right now the industry is listening very loud and clear. We've the 4 biggest ski companies in the US anyways have just recently signed on to the Climate Impact Charter, us, Vail Resorts, Point and Powder, committing to seriously attacking climate change wherever we can. The industry is looking at it through NSAA. So, all ears are listening for those solutions, and the people that can come up with them are going to be going to have the attention that those ideas deserve.
Let's jump across, and maybe Michelle, if you might want to look at the other side from coming from the world of conservation.
Certainly. Yeah, my perspective on, as you say, Scott, from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, kind of from a government agency and a public lands perspective. And, similarly, it's tough to protect what people don't love and what people don't own and what people don't utilize, because we're trying to protect and conserve these areas, not from themselves, but rather from us. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, and I think everyone's heard the phrase, "We're loving these places to death," and that's not necessarily true, at least in my perspective. So I think one of the biggest things that public land managers and agencies, whether it's National Park Service or Forest Service, BLM, state, local, regional, your local trails network, any of those kind of entities, everyone's widely aware, as you mentioned, Karen, of access being an issue, and how do we help get economic, perhaps underserved economic populations into the outdoors, and how do we provide for more equity, and then of course how do we make sure that these areas are protected and are conserved, so that they can continue to be used. One of the things that Colorado State Parks has done is, like at Staunton, they've provided for ADA, they provide ADA accessible mechanized wheelchairs, and then specific. Thank you, track chairs. It's like, it's not coming. I appreciate it. And that's been incredible. Again, getting the youth, that's another program Parks and Wildlife has focused on, with public libraries, kids not only can check out books, but with a family or an adult sponsor, and you can check out a backpack, and it comes with the state parks pass in it. So you can go to state parks and some fun activities to do at the state parks. So, first of all, making sure that we, the users, are aware, educated, motivated, desiring to go to these places. Two, being educated about how to use these places. Simple things, stay the trail, some of those kind of education, outreach, stewardship type programs. So I think the hardest thing is going to be coming up, and California has gone through this. A lot of folks, we've seen this throughout the world, not just in the nation, but I think the hardest thing from a public lands and usage perspective is going to be, how do we manage all of the additional people on the land? Do we need to start doing a permitting system? To hike Quandary up near Breckenridge, you have to park in town now or pay $50 and get a parking reservation because it was just overrun, and the trash and incredibly uncomfortable trash involving picking up toilet paper and the things that come with it. It's been tough. So how do you manage trail usage? I'm actually going to be joining the International Mountain Bike Association Board of Directors, and IMBA is doing a program or an extra project. I don't know if it's a program or a project yet. I haven't had my first board meeting, but it's called Trails are Common Ground. So it's all about coexisting on trails and how we use the trails, educating, sharing. But I think one of our biggest solutions from an entrepreneurial standpoint is going to be, how do we manage all of the use so we can all continue to enjoy the trails and continue to enjoy the outside, whether it's on or off trails, mountain biking, hiking, hunting, fishing. How do we all continue to be out there without stepping on each other and the very natural resource, nature and wildlife that we want to interact with?
I think maybe it might be interesting for Mike to talk a little bit about, because we talked about trail usage and public-private partnerships, and Mike's got some very interesting things that are going on up on the western slope. So maybe it might be a good time to talk about that.
Yeah, thanks for being here. It's really nice to see folks interested in this topic. I suppose I'm a bit of a case study on this topic because and I'm a bit of a yo-yo as well. I mean, I haven't been a nose instructor and really getting upset if I ever got to the top of a peak and there were people there. It just really bothered me. To flash forward and having a company where we had this light bulb moment that we weren't selling to the adrenaline athlete, we were actually selling to moms who made travel decisions, and that decision alone bumped our revenue up 25% in 1 year, and that was exciting. But of course, with that came a certain reluctance and concern that were we actually doing a good thing, and how could we be more responsible about driving more traffic into the wilderness. And now we find ourselves at the table with the Forest Service and the county and the local municipalities trying to figure out how to manage traffic on some of the most popular trails in the state. For those of you who've been out to Golden Springs, Hanging Lake Trail and Maroon Bells, those are the two of the three most popular hikes in the state. And all three of these, or both of these areas, have been heavily impacted by traffic, lots of trash, just a number of problems, very loose supervision. So a number of issues ranging from violence to any number of things you can imagine. But when we finally sat down with them, the Forest Service had raised the white flag and said, we just can't do this anymore. And it was a really wonderful conversation came out of that kind of resulted in that triangle in the middle. And I think we came up with a model that benefited everybody, where the revenue that sort of came in from us, but by turning over the management of the trail system to us, there was a profit sharing model. But I think the public-private partnership that came up from that realized that we were probably better equipped to manage that system, whether it was taking reservations, managing that traffic, also handling the transportation. And all those things I think have been beneficial for those particular trails. But I will say that it's not a perfect solution. And I think as we sort of figure this stuff out, that often when we figure out what that sweet spot is, there's still a lot of give and take and a lot of challenges around figuring what that looks like. And sometimes the best solution is not a perfect solution, but it's still better than what it was. So I think we're grateful to have been a part of a solution for a couple of trails in the state, and hope that that can become a model for some other trails, not just around Colorado, but around the United States.
Well, you want to talk a little bit about this same thing from your perspective with the 14ers initiative?
Sure. So is that on? Is that on?
There we go. Okay. So I run an organization called the Colorado 14ers Initiative. If you're from Colorado, you probably know of all of our 14,000-foot peaks. People debate whether it's 53, 58. I'm sort of agnostic on that. It's a lot of mountains and a lot of people go there. What's also important to understand is that when our organization was founded in 1994, there were precisely 2 planned intentional trails on the 14ers. So you started before there was any thought to how do all of these people sustainably recreate in this environment. Climbers trying to go up to high altitude peaks with most of the season at the time where it aligns with our peak thunderstorm activity. We try to go from trailhead to summit as quickly as possible and get down before the lightning got them. So they're not thinking about where they're going. They're following the path of least resistance, which may not be at all sustainable. And they're going through an incredibly rare and fragile environment. Alpine tundra plants are uniquely adapted to being the plants that can be at the far bounds of our Earth, right? And they're adapted to short growing seasons and high ultraviolet radiation and extremes of precipitation and temperature, but their Achilles heel is that they're vascular plants that if you step on them 5 to 10 times can be crushed, set back their growth, or die entirely. Alpine soil that's taken about 10 to 12,000 years to develop up there is now washing down the hill. So you had use combining with lack of infrastructure and creating a lot of impact. And this was back in the 90s when Colorado was a lot smaller in terms of population. For the decade of the 90s, we were the 3rd fastest growing state in the nation. In the aughts, I think we dropped to like 5 or 8, and we're back up there again. And a lot of times the reason that people are here is because they like skiing and climbing and mountain biking and rafting and doing all these different things. One of the fundamental problems we have, and the issue with kind of the sustainability model, is, and I'm probably not going to be terribly popular on the panel, but we have a lot of businesses that are figuring out ways to use our public resources that frankly give very little to actually taking care of what's out there. We saw Robin's inspirational video about outside and all the cool things we can do. And I will say, as someone who got into this climbing, skiing, and all those different things, I'm a part of the problem, right? But we talk about the Outdoor Retailer Trade Show coming here. I have been going to that event for 27 years. I can tell you there's an awful lot about new products, new things, great new adventure, and very little money goes actually into protecting these public spaces. Because realistically, we're almost always, unless you're super wealthy and going to a private ranch or some private facility, you're on public land. And so what is taking care of that? Who's taking care of that? And what does that cost? And I'll give an example, and it's sort of painful because I'm pointing out how even one of the most generous funders in the outdoor industry does a very small amount. So REI, one of our biggest corporate donors, gives 0.23% of its sales to all of the nonprofit partners. If we took, and we've inventoried all of the 14er trails foot by foot, noting how wide's the trail, how deep's the trail, what structures have been built, what's the status of them. We've graded all of this, we've costed out all of the work. $18.4 million that needs to be done to bring the 14er trail network up to a sustainable standard. If we took every dollar that REI gave out to nonprofits nationally, it would still take us 3 years to just improve our trail system. So you think all of the other different trails and infrastructure that are out on public lands, like who's paying for that? And I would say that, like in our case, it's largely individual hikers that we've connected with who are passionate about the 14ers. Some of those have been very successful individuals, people who've done well in business or have access to family resources. I mean, we have individual people who are giving more than all of the outdoor industry companies in a given year. So I think as we talk about the sustainability model, we need to be looking at what are the public spaces that we're using and what does it take to build the necessary infrastructure to handle the use that we have. For about 6 years now, we've been deploying compact infrared trail counters at 23 different locations and then using a model to estimate use on other peaks. 2020, we had 415,000 people climbing 14ers. That was a 1 year, 44% increase. On one hand, super great that these people are going out, they're getting connected with our public lands, they're doing things that in some respects might be some of the best experiences they've had with their friends, their family, they're motivated, they use it, they want to take care of it. But we also need to figure out, frankly, like how do all of the businesses and entities that rely on this public land, you know, the tragedy of the commons, how do we get people in business thinking, I'm using this, I need to give back. And the big issue, which I think we're going to have to talk about at the other part, is you know, so much of the outdoor user base has been, if you will, middle class and wealthier white folks going out there, and as we're now like, how do we make our public lands more accessible to new populations? That's more people. Our population's growing. And the problem just keeps getting harder with more and more people of how we put in the resources that protect the resource out there and allow people to equitably get out.
Great stats. Thanks very much, Lloyd. Rob, how about some big perspective on all of what you just heard?
I mean, it's a really big problem. I mean, you know, I don't know if they're, you know, you think about other industries, you know, certain types of taxes that might, you know, raise more money to, you know, help some of these issues. Taxes on specific products have been talked about in all kinds of industries. I don't see why it isn't applicable here as we have more and more people. You know, so it's just, it is this, you know, obviously as from a global perspective, we want people to be more active. We want them to, you know, not only get out and ski and run and all of these things, but we know that there's this very big impact of being in nature that, you know, in my opinion is, and will counter many things that come from things like social media and other challenges that people are having. And so we want people in nature, but how do you do that and basically recover from it over time is, I mean, and again, the only way I see that it being solved is that there is some type of tax that's specifically for this. I mean, technically you'd say we do because of how national parks are funded in other areas, but they don't have enough. It's not enough. It's not even close to enough when you think about 410,000 people hiking 14ers in a year. I mean, the offset has to be a fraction of that for what is actually there. So, you know, I definitely agree. I think businesses are going to have to lean in a lot more because it's sort of I mean, it's in some ways you'd argue it's not different than other industries where inevitably they will run out of the resource to be able to provide those things, and that will hurt their business, right? So I do think there's a big part about awareness, though, that, you know, a good example is, you know, we will write, I don't know, 3,000 articles this year on specific destination, you know, whether that be a ski resort, whether that be a national park, whatever it might be. And, you know, most people, if they get to the bottom of that article, they're inspired to go there. They're inspired to hike that 14er, but there's not actually a call to action right there at the end of that article. And so, you know, one thing that we're building right now, and you know, I'm ashamed to say I've been in cycling for 40 plus years, and I could probably only tell you 5 organizations off the top of my tongue that are really impacting, whether that be from a diversity or sustainability perspective in a category like cycling. And so one thing, an initiative we started earlier this year that we'll be launching next year is essentially we're going to have these resource centers identifying all of the organizations and doing really, you know, and are making a change. I think one of the biggest concerns I have, and this is like, in my wife was actually in, she worked for St. Jude and she was in the charity world for a long time. And, the reality is like there are a lot of organizations, but they're not all necessarily doing great work, and they're not all necessarily putting the right dollars and resources towards the problems. So I view our responsibility a little bit at outside is like not just putting up hubs that say, here are all of the things that you could support, but actually doing more research on those and identifying ones that are having a really big impact. So these resource centers around organizations, our goal is to bring a lot more visibility to them so that, it hopefully brands want to put more dollars towards them because they have more awareness. But frankly, even, if individuals, if they're out there and doing this, they should be investing in the fact that they want it to be there in the future, whether that be for them personally or their kids or the next generation. So I definitely think the industry has a big, I just call it an opportunity to raise a lot of awareness around these issues, because historically, I think it's been a real challenge and getting worse.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate that. So let's if that's sort of the state of play right now, let's talk a little bit about the future. Some of these have already come up, but looking forward, what are the critical issues facing this industry? How do you turn those into opportunities for entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurs as you start thinking about that? And maybe I'll start with our entrepreneur guy here. Mike, you want to start with that a little bit and see where we can get going?
A couple of thoughts. I think one thing that's been great talking to Robin and others is this notion of the triple bottom line, that you've got these larger entities that care not just about customers, about the employees, but about the earth, and that whether it's how they source ingredients or materials or the supply chain, that this notion of do no harm seems to be pretty prevalent in the outdoor industry. For that, I'm very grateful. Even as I've kind of pivoted to work with entrepreneurs on new businesses, we've got a guy who just launched a plant-based ski wax, because it turns out petroleum is in most ski waxes, and petroleum doesn't go away. So it's kind of nice that here was a win-win. This guy is taken off because the EPA came down pretty hard on petroleum-based ski wax, and whoever thought that this guy selling these small little baskets in the back of his pickup truck could actually now have this successful business. He's got a Shark Tank, all that stuff. So I think as far as market opportunities, certainly fundamentally, and hopefully a lot of those students who are in the room know that at the end of the day, you're solving a problem. You're just paying attention to something you really care about, that you're solving a problem that means something to you personally. And there's always going to be those problems that crop up, even as people come around to solve those problems. There'll be new problems. So in that sense, I think I'm grateful to be a part of an industry that for the most part cares about that triple bottom line and cares about doing no harm. It doesn't mean that we're not continuing to sort of figure out how we can do better, and that there's plenty of folks out there or companies that are still doing plenty of harm. But I do think that, probably the thing we're talking a lot about now is supply chain. And I think this is a very hard discussion to have, because for the most part, people are still sourcing most of their materials in their supply chain in very poor countries. We've got a big surge in whitewater SUPs right now, and bad fish is kind of the biggest player in the marketplace. And you can get bad fish products to save your life all summer. Like, we've got 600 back orders for bad fish products. So we now have a bunch of entrepreneurs that are trying to bring that supply chain back to a domestic place. Montrose is this up and coming outdoor, business center. They're in the process of building a factory there that could actually build rafts and SUPs and other things like that, which is highly unusual. So on one hand, it's really nice to have that supply chain be brought back because there's jobs, but at the same time, there's still this greater need to do things thoughtfully, carefully, do no harm, and even if it means that there'll be a higher cost to the products.
Karen, I'd love to have your thoughts on this subject, and also maybe backing up a little bit, as obviously a big player, the whole thought of the cost and sharing the cost. And I'm sure this is something you talk about a lot, and probably part of some of the things that you're thinking about, but love to hear both the answers to the question on what are the opportunities, but also your thoughts on just the burden of the cost of all of this.
I mean, obviously we've got we're in a different place in terms of cost of maintaining our areas and conservation. It's something that we focus on year round, and especially in the shoulder seasons and between the ski season, we're doing planting and trail mitigation and all kinds of conservation efforts. But it's very different than those that are using, public trails that are not, we either have private land or we're under, USFS permits where we have an obligation and requirements around what we're doing to protect and conserve that land, and lease payments that go into the Forest Service to help to maintain those areas, but also others. So it's a very different model, but I completely agree with the fact that as a state and as a country and a continent, a solution needs to be had for looking after the public areas as well that are not necessarily owned and or operated by a single business, because again, that's where it's driving that passion for the mountains and the outdoors and people doing year-round outdoor sport that is bringing the visitation to our resorts, during the summer and the winter months. And in terms of making the decisions though, right now, like I said, we as a company, we're listening and we're looking for solutions. So it is not always, and it's most often not about what's the most cost-effective option, because again, that return on investment is there for, sourcing supply chain that might be more expensive, but people are making their consumer decisions now based on kind of what they care about and their values and what's important to them. And there's those intangibles from a business perspective, I'm speaking, purely with that lens on of, what can we do that's good for our business, that's good for sustainability of our business into the future. And like I said earlier, sort of cracking that code on, diversity and access for all into the mountains and growing that share, but also making sure that we're doing it responsibly and protecting the spaces that we operate on in doing so, and reducing our carbon footprint and that of our guests and others through, whether it's through our 1, 2, or 3 emissions. We need to be making choices that look at all of that. So for the the plant-based ski wax guy and the Spanky's trail map that's a wiper cloth and not using disposable trail maps and different things. There's a whole host of products that we can look at, whether we're selling them or whether they're related to, again, access, transportation to the mountains, the gear that you're using, the stuff that you're wearing, what you're working on, all of that, food and beverage, all of our waste options. We want to hear from, the entrepreneurs and the suppliers out there of what can we be doing that's better and more responsible. So.
Thanks, Karen. Appreciate it. Michelle, would you mind just talking maybe from the conservation perspective and a little bit around this whole question?
Yeah, so I think from a going forward, obviously, Lloyd, I really appreciate you really did a great job outlining, the problem, and I think we all are very familiar with it. I'm listening and I'm trying to, listen to everyone else. I'm like, now I'm trying to come up with all these ideas instead of give the perspective so that everyone else can come up with the ideas. But I do, yeah, from a public land manager agency kind of hat and perspective, we've talked a lot in various different conferences that we've been invited to, and about how does the outdoor industry, is there going to be a gear tax? Of course, Robin, we've talked about gear tax for decades. Yeah. There already is, obviously, parks and wildlife agencies or wildlife agencies throughout the nation are funded essentially by a gear tax that's on fishing and hunting products. So, not solely funded by that, but that is a fair amount of funding comes from those places. The management of lands and resources, where does the funding come to do that work? Well, if you're a wildlife agency, a lot of it does come from a use tax of fishing and hunting, from licensing, from sportsman fishing and hunting and using of state parks and state wildlife areas. But if you're Forest Service, it might be coming from leases, from other things. So where these funds are coming from, or if it's a national parks pass, whatever it might be, versus all the budget it takes to actually implement what needs to be done. Again, whether it's management of user management, too many people, how do we, like the Hanging Lake example, how do we still allow for enjoyment of these areas without, or at least by limiting the damage. I think that's a lot of where we have a problem, we have a need. How do we line item out that need? How do we say, all right, we need this much money, this is our difference in the budget, and here's the things we're going to do with that money, like 14ers has done, where you've said, all right, we've got this much money, these are all the trails we need to do work on to make them more sustainable. We need to put a switchback here, we need to put a bridge here, we need to do these things here. You've done that work. So now it's a matter of where do we go to get the people, the volunteers, the funding, the support. And I'm just going to really, I guess all I'm doing is really seconding and summarizing what others are saying here. But Parks and Wildlife is doing a lot of these things through like the State Trails Committee, through building awareness, education at the state parks. We do a lot of work with, or Parks and Wildlife, I'm no longer on the commission, I termed out, but Parks and Wildlife does a lot of work with the State Trails Planning Committee, using funds from OHV registration and boat registration. So education, awareness, stewardship, and I'm also going to second what Robin was saying about, if there is an article or something, is there a way at the end to raise awareness and say, okay, if you're going to go visit XYZ location, consider looking into these nonprofits to offset your impact or to get involved or whatever that might be.
Lloyd, can you weigh in?
Well, I think one of the biggest issues we have going forward is just how do we allow all of the people who want to go outdoors, and we want to encourage that, right? I mean, yes, there are impacts in various different ways, but life is so much better when you do these things. But how do we both manage the volume and do it in a way that is not solely on the ability to pay? So like doing 14ers is something you can do unless you're wanting to climb in snow and ice, right? Is about 12 weeks out of the year. And it's really kind of mid-June to sort of mid-August, kids start going back to school, use drops dramatically. Maybe with climate change, the shoulder season stuff, maybe we get more room right, it helps us out, it hurts you, but So how do we manage people getting in there, and how do you take some level of, because we'll assume there's some limited capacity, there's some maximum number of people that can responsibly go there without totally trashing the place. How do we manage that? Because so many of the models we have are on ability to pay, and that runs, against the current of how do we make the outdoors more accessible to people who've historically not had the money, resources, or felt the ability to go there. I mean, that's going to be a huge challenge, because if you look at, in skiing, variable pricing, it's like, if you want to go on President's Day weekend, it's going to be a lot more expensive than if you want to go on, a Wednesday in early December. I think one of the things that we're looking at as well is just, this summer, we've had 2 locations where places that people have just sort of assumed are open to the public are actually on private land, and the private landowners are saying, nope, closing this down, due to access and liability issues. So, how do we make sure that the places that people are going to are acquired and brought into the public domain? And one of the other issues I think we need to look at is, I'm also on another organization that gives out money to search and rescue groups. And there's this huge inequity between, if you have a hunting license or a fishing license, I think you have like 75 cents or $1 on there. If you are just a hiker or a mountain biker or what have you, you're not paying anything to anyone to go out there. And yet 40–50% of all of the people needing to be hauled out of the wilderness someplace by search and rescue teams, which are all volunteer, our people aren't paying anything. So, you know, we've done an awful lot to try to tap into the people who hike and climb 14ers and encourage philanthropy, but we have this free rider phenomenon as well. And like, how do we get users that are willing to say, I benefit from this, I'm willing to pay, you know, that's another part of it. So, but again, if people are paying, how does that affect equity issues and you know, trying to make the outdoors not as elite as they have been perceived as.
Thanks, Lloyd. Great. Robin?
Can I just say,
Yeah,
the Canadian
please.
way is to put boxes and people just throw money in as they're walking up the trail and nobody steals them.
Anybody that rides a bike knows that those are on mountains too. They just like, they have these water stations and you just put the money in at the top. I think they do pretty well, actually. I don't know. You know, I guess I'm trying to think about specifically like you as potential entrepreneurs, like what are the things that you could build? And, you know, when I think about, you know, whether it's you know, I think about a lot of things that have happened in various categories, even in the active lifestyle, you know, space. Like, you know, there's a company called Charity Miles that, you know, is about fundraising based on the activity level you have. And, you know, they have some awareness in an app like that, you know, draws attention to donating to organizations. But that's very specific, I would say, to the running community. As an example, it's not very specific to, say, the hiking or skiing or other communities. You know, but I just think there has to be a way without, you know, potentially going all the way to, you know, whether it be a hiker's license that gives, you know, and maybe that is part of the solution, but I think you almost have to go the next step and start saying, how do you gamify some of these things to want people to engage in a different way and potentially give back and potentially share that? And you think about models like Tom's or, you know, others. How do we make sure that somebody might go out and have a really good time and then have the opportunity to support someone else going and contribute to that? So I just think we're at a stage from a technology perspective that, you know, there is really clearly very broad access to technology, and how do we implement that in a way that solves some of these problems? I certainly think is doable, but it takes, you know, frankly, a lot of smart, and I would argue at some level, the people that have been in the industry for a long time aren't necessarily going to be best at solving it. It's going to take new energy to think about these problems and solve them in a different way. But I do think technology at some level is the key.
Follow up on that really resonates. You know, I think for a lot of folks in the audience who are maybe listening and trying to think, well, how do I plug into this? You know, I think a lot of these circles that interconnect, you know, a lot of it is about the public-private partnership and being part of the discussion, but it certainly seems that a lot of solutions are not just top down, but also bottom up. So grateful to have Outside Magazine, as well as, I don't know, some of you may be familiar with North Face and the work they're doing with Jimmy Chin to try to bring equity into schools. For those of you who've seen Free Solo or some of his most recent movies, it's nice that there's this concerted effort with a lot of capital that's going into this specific initiative. But, you know, it doesn't always mean you have to have money to get these things off the ground. I guess in my own experience, I think schools have been the best place to create equity. You know, we take school groups out all the time for like these fall team building trips, mostly rafting trips. And just like the ski industry identified, like, hey, if you give those 5th grade ski passes, you might have a skier for life, and it's proven to be true. We've also seen that just the effort we've spent with local schools to try to get all kids engaged and kind of love the outdoors. Now, there is some trickle down towards equity with that. We certainly have had some success with the Latino population. But I think for folks that are in this room, you know, feeling like maybe this is a bigger problem to tackle than you can, just get involved with your own community or your own school. There's a lot that you can do from the bottom up to really have an impact on these issues.
Thanks, Mike. Any of the others have comments on the same kind of thing, the things that you can do? Because I think one of the things that stands out here is there's lots of problems, not a ton of solutions, but these are complex situations. This is not There's no silver bullets out there. There's no simple solutions. There's some top down, there's some public policy work that can be done, and there's some certainly some things that can happen out of the nonprofit world. But what else could be done from any of your perspectives as from a bottoms up perspective for the people in this room who are interested in this problem? What else is out there? Shelby, you're nodding your head.
Well, I think, again, the license idea is pretty interesting. It's, of course, again, a pay to play. And that's a tough one. That comes with all of its own problems as well. The Parks and Wildlife groups there's a outdoor association kind of committee that has been meeting to talk about something called the outdoorist card. And it would kind of be a come one, come all. You get one license, and that allows you to hike and bike and do all of the various different things on Colorado Parks and Wildlife managed land. Again, that's one agency, and CPW doesn't have the thousands and thousands of public land that our federal agencies have. So, I mean, it's everything from, the idea of if you go rafting and you had a great time, maybe there's a way to drop the money in a box to pay for a kid or another person that might not be able to afford that rafting trip. Programs like that, whether it's an Airbnb for recreation, so to speak, some kind of a sharing app that it's some ability to help others not only be given the opportunity to be out and experience nature, but also give the education and the stewardship and the awareness. We all know we open an app, not just for interaction, but a lot of times for information. That's where we go, how do I use this thing, whether it's a ski area or a mountain bike or a trail. So, those are definitely some things that I know CPW is looking into. And I think that those things will be transferable to state, to local county parks and trails programs, all the way up to perhaps national parks and federal management.
Any other thoughts, Karen?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I agree with Robin that I think that there's solutions in technology, and it's probably gonna come from people outside the industry thinking outside the box about what's necessary. But what we really need is a way to move people through more efficiently, quicker, with less waste, less of a carbon footprint, and create access and exposure to a broader group of people, going back to the the magazine in the Safeway example, but using technology, whether it's apps or other platforms, but to expose people that may not otherwise be exposed. And so that, I think, is part of it, but also too, how do you make the experience easier, more efficient, more accessible, and with less waste or emissions in doing so. So kind of thinking through that technology piece, and whether it's gear exchanges or co-ops or transportation management or housing management, or kind of trying to think through what the problems are and tackling the solutions from the root.
Well, if I could jump in, so as we're thinking about technologies and how technologies will help, one of the things that I'd love to challenge people to figure out, how can we figure out a way so that we don't have the Instagram overuse of places that we have. And we were talking beforehand about surging numbers of people who are going out backcountry skiing, who saw something, or it's in the pandemic, so I'm not going to go to the ski area, I'm going to go out. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm going out. And, we, a couple of summers ago, it was about 2017, I think it was, we had a really big year with fatalities in the Elk Mountains, and people who were climbing Capitol Peak as their first 14er. It didn't end well. People died. Every week there was like a new group of people dying. So we went in with a film crew, got permission to go in to sort of do some educational stuff. And as we were coming out, here's some guy in Vans, and I forget his partner, what he was wearing, totally unprepared, like, hey, were you guys still on the knife edge? So, how do we, as we're both sharing everything we're doing, how do we also get at the issue of education and people understanding that if they're doing a lot of these activities, they really need to figure out how they become informed about it. It's not just buying the gear, it's going to a guide service or it's going to a school. It's kind of figuring out how you can responsibly recreate doing these things. And I think technology is sort of causing part of this problem. How is there a way we can, turn it from evil to good in making people more responsible users out there who know what they're doing and are being safe, so they're not putting demands on, say, rescue groups, and that there's some way that they're paying their way for building trails or bridges or whatever needs to be done.
That's actually a great concluding comment, I think. Here we're up against the time. I think everybody can see very, very interesting perspectives, lots of issues out there, lots of places to get involved, lots of places looking for lots of pain, looking for solutions. So hopefully you got some good information out of all of this. Realize this is a big, complex issue, but something that Colorado is the epicenter, and I think we have a lot of chances to do some things about this. So I'd like to thank the panel. You've been wonderful. Really appreciate your perspectives, and thanks to everybody for coming. Did you have some final comments? Thanks for coming.